Welcome everyone to Book Carnival in Orange, California. Tonight we're just delighted to be talking to Sulari Gentill and her new book, The Woman in the Library, which has turned out to be a smash hit everyone immediately. I've never seen anything explode quite the way it has. Were you prepared for that?
Sort of, not really. You always, with every book, every writer hopes that it will be that kind of success. And I think when you write your first book, every writer thinks that it'll be that kind of success. But this is my 15th book, so I'd gotten used to just being a writer and, you know, having the moderate success and just getting a book out there and being happy about that. My publishers had actually said to me that they thought that this would be a big book, but you don't actually believe them until it happens. You think, oh well, they probably tell everybody that just to keep us quiet. But I started to see early on that it was, you know, getting huge amount of Goodreads reviews and attention before it was even released.
Yes.
And there was that buzz that was happening about it. And so it was, I had an idea that this one would be a little bit different, but I was completely blown away by just how different. Zeitgeist is one of those funny things you just don't know. It's a strange beast that you can't control. And so if you have hold of its tail, you've just got to hold on and hope.
Well, you're in the second printing in Australia. It was just released here today in the US. And when is it going to be released in Great Britain?
In October in Great Britain. And there's a couple of other countries that it's going to pop out in, but over the next year, you know, they buy the rights and
Sure.
then it pops.
So you have all the reaction that's been coming from here for the people who have pre-read it. And now the real people, the buyers, are getting their hands on it. And yep. It's going to be interesting because I have never heard quite so many elaborate and positive comments about a new book in quite some time. That everyone is intrigued with the plot, the way you've set it up. Just everything about it appeals to people, and it's I can't believe the amount of great praise that's out there already here, considering it's just coming out today. Here.
It's been mind-blowing. I can't explain it. I wish I could. I'd just do it again.
Of course.
I don't know. I do have a wonderful team at Source Books who have really believed in this book from the first. So I remember when my agent went out to the various publishers with the manuscript, and the letters came back from, you know, various publishers, but it was Source Book who said that, you know, they just put it on the table and said they really believed in this book and they really thought that they could use it to break me out. And there was something about what they said and the way they said it. I believe them. I believe that, you know, whatever happened, they really were committed to the book. And as a writer, that's what you really want. I mean, I suppose you want grand, you know, six-figure advances too, but they fade in comparison to having someone who really believes in your book and who really likes it, you know, behind that push. It makes all the difference. So that was lovely. I remember when they were reading it, one of the editors, even as she was reading it, was messaging me saying, oh my God. So I knew that they were sincere. And so that's been really lovely. It is an unusual book, I suppose, and there's been a lot of speculation in Australia about why all of a sudden the crime fiction that's more on the cozy end is suddenly getting very popular. I wouldn't call this book a cozy, but it does have those sort of Agatha Christie type sensibilities. in there. And it's not, I wouldn't say it's gritty, but the feeling is that after COVID, people just want happier stories or messages that are a little bit more hopeful than they were willing to stomach before COVID. I don't know whether that's true. It could be, but it has a lovely cover. And,
It definitely has a lovely cover.
Which is, that's the cover. Do you want to see the Australian cover?
Yes.
That's the Australian cover.
Oh my goodness.
So look at these two together. Insane, isn't it?
Yes, I'll take the one. I take the first one.
Yes. Well, when the Australian cover was sent to me, I just laughed for a full 5 minutes. It was so unusual. But the funny thing is that both probably this depict the book accurately. They just concentrate on different elements. The American cover sort of looks at the dark, literary, sort of crimey part of it, and the Australian cover looks at the fun in it. So they're just different, focus on different parts, but they're both in the book. But it's been really amusing having two such different covers. It feels like you've got two books.
It does. Now, we know it's set in a library. And why did you choose the geographical location that you did?
Okay. So there's a story behind that. I was actually writing another book. And I wanted to write a book set in America, partly because, and you know, I had a completely sentimental reason for wanting to write books set in America, because and this was before I had gone on tour to America, but because my books were getting such a lovely reception in America, and the Roland Sinclair series was getting a following, and I kind of felt like I wanted to. Yes, that one. I wanted to do something for American readers. I wanted to say thank you by setting a book in their country. Okay. Problem was, I wasn't in America, and and when you're setting a book in somewhere you haven't been, the worst thing you can do is get it wrong. I know, you know, the books that people have set in Australia and they're wrong, it jars and it takes you right down. So I was, so in order to get those details right, I was corresponding with a friend of mine who is an American writer. So Larry Vincent is, he was an American fiction writer, and he was writing a non-fiction book, and it was set in Boston. So he was in Boston researching that book. And so I thought, well, that's fine. I'll correspond with Larry. He can do bits of research for me. He can check the manuscript to make sure that I'm not getting anything about Boston wrong, and we can correspond while he's over there. And that worked out well. Larry's a very generous and lovely man, and so we were corresponding. But the thing with Larry is he's a much, much better researcher than I am. Because he comes from a non-fiction background, he researches to a level that I wouldn't think about. So not only was he answering my questions, he was sending me maps and menus, suggestions of places to go, weather reports, and he started taking footage of the sidewalks so I could see that they were cobbled and so on. And then one day there was a murder a couple of blocks from where he was staying. Oh. And he thought, it'll probably be useful for Sulari to know what an American crime scene looks like, you know, with crime scene tape and coroner's vans. So he went down there after the body had been removed, and he took footage of the crime scene. Oh my. And he sent it to me. And so I'm sitting in Australia, and I open the email and I open the movie file, and my husband happens to be standing behind me, and he said, gosh, I hope Larry's not killing people so he can send you research. And I'm almost 100% sure that he wasn't, but I thought, wow, that's a really good idea for a novel. And so I finished that other novel, and this one just fermented. And so I knew I'm a pantser. I don't plot at all, but I knew that this novel would start with a letter and it would be addressed Dear Hannah. And so that's the framework that it starts in. So really, the novel is a story within a story set into a correspondence. What you see is the correspondence from Leo to Hannah. Hannah is an Australian writer. Leo is in Boston and he's an American writer. And he's corresponding with Hannah, offering to do her research for her. He's also a fan. And in the beginning, he's everything you could possibly want or hope for in a fan. He's, you know, I think he's kind of funny and he's sweet and he's really enthusiastic and supportive. But as the letters continue through the book, you start to realize that there's something really quite dark about Leo and that he seems to know quite a lot about murder. But also into the story is, into that framework, is the story that Hannah writes in response to Leo's letters. So there's basically Leo sends her a letter with research and she writes a chapter and she sends him that chapter. So you never actually hear directly from Hannah, but you see the chapter that she writes in response to Leo's letter. And in some ways, I think that's where you find authors, really. You find authors in their books. And you hear from them most clearly when you read their work, in a way that, you know, just talking to them doesn't actually allow. So that's how the setup works. The story that Hannah is writing opens in the Boston Public Library. Her protagonist is a young woman called Winifred Kincaid, and Winifred, her friends call her Freddie, is in Boston on a writer's fellowship, and she's trying to write her first novel, so it's got to be worthy. And so she goes to the Boston Public Library, and she's sitting there basically trying to start a novel, and she's procrastinating and mind doodling, and she's staring at the ceiling, and she's looking at the people at the table who are sharing the table with her, and she's trying to imagine backstories for them and thinking about them rather than actually getting on with writing a novel, when suddenly this scream rings out through the reading room, and everybody stops everything because it seems like such a, you know, it's clear to everyone that something terrible has happened. And the security guards come in and they say, everybody stay where you are, while they go off to investigate where the scream came from. And in those moments where they're suddenly at the table and the reading room rules don't apply, they can talk to each other, they actually start talking. And they're a funny little quartet of people that are kind of bonded by the shared experience of a scream in the reading room of the Boston Public Library. And of course, there's, at that time, a body isn't found. Nobody knows why there was a scream. It just seems to come from nowhere and disappear into nowhere. Oh. But of course, it didn't, because, you know, it's a crime fiction. You need a body. and when the body is found, of course, these four are bonded together and they were there. So they feel this responsibility to look into it.
It's fascinating and complicated at the same time. But I understand it's a smooth read.
I hope so.
Yes. Well, when you have so many layers of things that you're doing, you sometimes hear people say, oh, I couldn't keep track of it. But the reviews have said exactly the opposite, that it flows beautifully.
I think it's one of those things that it's more complicated to explain than to actually read. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, I suppose it's like a painting. With every painting, there's lots and lots and lots of layers. But when you look at a painting, you're looking at the whole. And each of those layers add to the other and support the other. And it all makes sense when it's all together.
And I don't know if all of you know it, but Sulari is very talented, very creative in so many things she does. She paints, she writes, she does community things. And I do have to ask you to talk about the trees a little bit. It's one of the events they did that just touched my heart so much after the fires they went through.
So I don't know if you remember in 2019, 2020, that New Year period, the bushfires in Australia were insane. So the entire east coast was on fire. So the little town I live in is a tiny little town in the mountains, and it was hit by what was called the Duns Road fire. Now, by the time the Duns Road fire hit us, the front of the fire was 1,000 kilometers wide. So you couldn't get around it. It was this juggernaut just coming in, eating up the country before it. And the flames were hundreds of feet high. And because the fire was so big, it was creating its own weather systems before it and creating what we call fire tornadoes. So there were tornadoes of fire that were picking up fire trucks and turning them over. And there would be, I remember seeing one as I was coming back home whilst, the fires were on, we were trying to fight it. And I saw, it looked like a nuclear mushroom with lightning at the top. It was just the most amazing, crazy time. So Batlow is a little town in the mountains, and it was declared undefendable. So basically we were told by the authorities, town's going to be razed. There's going to be nothing left. Everybody's got to get out. Of course, country people, being what country people are, they refused. And so the RFS, which is our Rural Fire Service, which is a volunteer fire service, had to stay in the town and fight. I evacuated to the next town, Tumut, but my husband and my son were up here fighting the fires. In the end, they saved about 80% of the town. But a lot was lost. But what mainly the big things that I found most awful to lose, and the fire hit my house as well. My house was standing, but what I lost was all my trees. In my garden was a 100-year-old oak that I loved, that had a swing in it. So it was the reason I bought the house in the first place. I didn't really like the house, but there was this oak in the back, and I was going to live under that oak. And it had branches that just covered the whole garden, and it kept the place cool. And when my children were babies, they'd be swung in the swing that came from that tree, and they would climb that tree, and we had all the birthday parties under the tree. So it seemed like that tree and the oaks around it, they were our guardians, and certainly they saved the house. So where we were was one of the worst places for the fire, but our house remained standing, and it was because these grand old oaks caught the fire in their branches and they held it. So oaks are funny sort of trees. They're deciduous trees. They don't pass on fire. So they just caught these, and at the time there was these massive fireballs coming across the paddocks, and they were being caught by the oaks and held. So when we came back, the oaks were gone or burnt or damaged, but the house was still there. And so, I was quite emotional about trees as a whole, because, it wasn't just them too. There was the 1,000-year-old Australian gums in the bush around us that were also gone. We lost thousands, millions and millions of trees and the animals that lived in them. So after the fires, there was a project where they gathered the local artists, and they said, we want you to create something to commemorate the fires. And of course, the sculptors and the painters, they know what to do. But as a writer, it's kind of hard to think of something you can do to commemorate a fire for a public place. And so what we did, or what I did, is there was this little place called the Arboretum, and it was saved. So there was about 50 or 60 trees that survived. Everything around it was like a war scene. It was just black, and there was these 50 or 60 trees. And that's where we were going to have a festival to celebrate coming through the fires. And so as my project, I decided I would make the trees talk. And so what we did is we used GPS technology and people's smartphones and so on. I called for help with my fellow writers. I had an overwhelming response from writers in Australia, and I gave them each a tree. And I said, this is your tree. It's the Sitka spruce, or it's the cedar or the English elm, because it was an arboretum and they had a variety of trees. Write me a story from the perspective of that tree. And so I had these beautiful stories come in, and we recorded them with, voice actors, and then we linked them to the tree via GPS. So people could walk through the forest and they just connect with their phone and the tree would tell them a story. And it was lovely. It was just really lovely to give the trees a voice. And it was a lovely way to commemorate what had happened without it being bogged down in grief and loss. And to look at things from the kind of elongated perspective you get from a tree, because some of these trees, would live for 1,000 years. So they were just babies. They might have been 100 years old, but they were just babies.
Just brilliant.
Yes.
It was a lovely project to be part of, and every part of it was wonderful. The overwhelming response from the Australian community, and in fact, I had these American writers coming in saying, "We can do it. We can give you a story," and which was lovely. But I was so overwhelmed with the number of stories. I restricted it to the Australians. But it just seemed to me like such a lovely interactive way to do it. And the stories were really wonderful. They were from science fiction writers and crime writers, and there were little crime stories, and the trees that argue with each other, and the Californian the giant tree, the sequoia. I think it's a California, one of the big ones. He had an issue with the English elm, and they had this constant back and forth between them. And it was just a delightful thing to be part of, and to share with people in a way that writers don't often get to. We don't often get to be part of exhibitions or interactive things in that sense. A lot of our art is quiet, solitary enjoyment as opposed to interactive enjoyment. So that was a great deal of fun to do, and it was up for about 6 months, so people could walk through, and I'd go out there with writers, and we'd set up little chairs and have a glass of champagne and just listen to the stories that the trees were telling us.
I just thought it was so wonderful. I wanted that to be shared with everyone. And it's on a recording, so many more people will hear that. It just impressed me so to have something so beautiful after something so devastating.
It is. I mean, and it's amazing what has come out of the devastation. There's a certain tenacity of the human spirit that it seems that people want to create more beautiful things all the time. And having this scarred landscape, and so Batlow, the hills around us are black still, and the fire was so hot in places that the trees haven't come back and the green hasn't come back. But people seem to be more committed now to creating beautiful things despite that. So that's been one of the lovely things to come out of the fire. That sense of community spirit, and that determination to find beauty, and also just to recognize what we had. In a lot of ways, we were in the bush, we were surrounded by beautiful trees, we lived in one of the most beautiful places in the world, and I suppose it's not so much that we took it for granted, but I don't think we felt the sheer awesomeness of it on a daily basis until we lost it.
I think that's typical of everyone, unfortunately. But when she first told me this, I was just in awe of such a program and such creative thinking to have something like that come about. So now we'll get back to talking about your books. They're very successful books. You have this wonderful series that has been going on for several years that everybody loves, and you're going to continue that, I hope.
Oh, Of course, yes. Roland's just having a little bit of a rest while I have this dalliance with metafiction.
Oh,
He had got to 10 books, and I had thought, well, that's a good place just to pause it for a couple of years.
mhm.
And also, you know, he's probably going to be taken over by another publisher. And so whilst all of that is working out to figure out where he's going to live, it's, you know, there's a little pause. But you know, this is the lovely thing. I often I have readers who write to me in extreme agitation because there is no Roland Sinclair book coming out this year, and they're quite irritated that I would be playing with other books.
Uh-huh.
It's
Yes,
like I'm cheating.
you can't win when you do something like this.
Well, the thing is, you know, a series or a standalone that's successful breathes life into everything else. It means I have the ability to ask for the indulgence of publishers for a long series.
Right.
So in a lot of ways, doing this is for Roland as well.
Okay. Just keep telling your fans that.
Exactly. Which is and it is really heartening that they care that much that they can get mad.
Well, it's a wonderful series, and everybody feels like they're a part of it and that they have something to say about it.
Yeah. Look, I love writing Roland. I've never stopped writing Roland, loving writing Roland. And I have actually got book 11 half finished.
Okay.
And so it's and I have an idea of where things, well, I don't plot, but I have a notion of how the series is going to go. So I always did want to write Roland right through the war. So because it feels like the war is hanging over that series, and it felt like it would be wrong to stop it before I could take readers with me and Roland through the war to see how it all came out for him. So there is that. So that's all. I'm looking forward to writing that and having it all unravel. So I know that the very last book in the Roland Sinclair series will be in 1945 at the end of the war.
Okay.
I'm only in 1936 at the moment. There's a few books. There's a few books to go.
That's good to hear. Now, what about the next book? Is it
Next
going
book,
to be?
there is a so there was a standalone that I was also writing before I wrote The Woman in the Library. And it was one of the ones that I was consulting with Larry for. And it's actually set in Kansas as opposed to Boston. Also somewhere I've never been, but somewhere where Larry grew up in Kansas, so he was able to help me with that. The problem with that story is that it was changed by COVID. So COVID changed the way we look at the world, and it changed. So some stories can live on either side of COVID with no problems, but other stories don't make sense in a post-COVID world. And so I had to go back and tweak it and change it and address the issues and the changes that COVID brought to the narrative. And that's, basically ready to go. I was supposed to have finished it last month, but then things exploded and I've had no time to sit down and finish writing. So once things calm down a little bit, which I'm sure they will soon, we're still in sort of launch week. So, in 2 continents, which is a little bit mad. But as soon as that's calmed down a little bit, I'm really keen to get back to just doing the last little bits that I need to do. And then that book will be ready to go. It also is slightly metafiction. So it's funny, the standalones I've written have been getting all metafiction. So After She Wrote Him is very metafiction. And then there was The Woman in the Library, which is also quite postmodern and a bit meta. And this third one is meta again, but meta in a different way to the other 2. So I think of them as my 3 meta books. And I think once I've finished, I will have said everything I want to say in every possible way about that particular subgenre.
Well, it's wonderful to hear that both things are going to happen, but you have a lot of promotion work ahead of you and a lot of visiting to different places with the book opening or being delivered, whatever word I want, to
Yeah.
each continent. You know, as here in the US, you said you're coming later for a visit,
In October, yes.
which is exciting. And then you'll have to go to England, of course.
Yeah.
So
Yes, and drop into England and and see because they're releasing in October. But you know, it's not even so much physically things calming down. It's just for me at the moment. I've been so shocked and overwhelmed. I can't write at the moment because I'm thinking, oh my God, what's happening? and I'm sure that, you know, in a few days that'll calm down and I'll get back to being steady and not being so completely overwhelmed or excited
oh,
and
I,
surprised by what's happening.
I
Uh,
suggest just enjoying it 100%.
oh, look, I am. It's really lovely. And I was saying to my husband the other day that I'm kind of glad it happened at book 15 rather than book 1. I think if it happened at book 1, it'd be so completely overwhelming, but also you wouldn't realize how special it is.
Yes.
You know how many books you can release without, which do okay, but I never this kind of reaction. To have a book break out and to have everyone talking about it is something really amazing and really special. And I've had 14 books to get used to what it is to be a writer so that I'm steady through it. It doesn't actually knock me off the path.
And Sulari has promised to visit us in October when she comes. We can't wait to
Yeah.
see her. That's always fun.
Oh, look, there's the Robert and Jock and Em and I often talk about Book Carnival and the reception that we had there. It was really one of the highlights of the entire tour. It made us all feel like superstars, actually.
Oh,
That is so sweet of you to say, because I know you went to quite a few places across the country, but we felt the same way. We felt honored that you came to Book Carnival. So it was mutual. Look at it that way.
Yeah.
maybe we can get Larry to come.
I think Larry would love to come, and I know Larry would be happy to do interviews and so on, because he's a writer, he knows. and I've been suggesting to people that it would be fun to do an interview with me and Larry, and you could see him. He's a really lovely man. He's not a serial killer.
That's such a relief to hear.
In fact, he's a medical doctor. He's a caring person, and but it's yeah. So and now he lives in Australia now. He migrated a couple of years ago, so he lives in Melbourne. So I catch up with him every now and then, but I'm sure he'd love to come. He's been tickled pink because Boston is his old town. And to see it all and I did an interview in the Boston Globe where I told them the story of Larry, and they refused to print his last name, and I was saying, look, I'm sure they didn't want an FBI investigation of you. Just trying to protect you. But yeah, so it's been lovely. It's been lovely to share that with him, because you know we did it very much the way that Leo and Hannah did it in the thing. I sent him the book to review for Australianisms, and you know, getting the language right, because there is quite a difference in the way we talk. It's subtle, but it's there. Mm-hmm. And so he picked me up on things and terms that Americans had never used, and you know, things like Americans say cell phone instead of mobile phone, and those sort of things that really take you out of the story if you get it wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's true. We got used to the British books over the years and learned what a jumper is and so on. But Australian words would be a a little harder for us.
Well, also you don't want an American character using Australian words. Fine for
Exactly.
Australian characters to use it, but when an American character uses Australian words, you think, what? And so he was picking up on all of that. But because of the structure of the book, what I was able to do, sometimes I'd take his editorial, and instead of changing what Hannah wrote, I would put it into a letter from Leo. So it all became quite meta. And I kind of rolled him into my story and then just changed the name a little bit so that people didn't think that he was a serial killer.
I think it's wonderful. Now, there haven't been any questions posted. You ladies must have some questions or comments.
I was thinking, after all your Roland Sinclair stories, how you came up with this concept for this metafiction book.
Well, it was just really sparked by that footage that Larry sent to me with the crime scene, and Michael saying, I hope he's not killing people to send you research, because it seemed to me like such an absurd but interesting idea. and I've corresponded with fans over the years, and some of them are really intense, so you can almost see it.
Yes.
So there was a little bit of that. For me, ideas have never been the problem. It's just having the time to get them all down. There always seems to me, the world is full of stories and possible stories. And if I have a talent, it's being able to see between things to the story that's hidden in the cracks. So when I look at history, or when I look at any sort of article or any sort of story, I see another story in there. I see, oh, well, what about that person? What were they thinking? Why were they there? And that's where it all branches and starts. So I think I'm not worried about running out of ideas. And the wonderful thing about having a breakout book is all of a sudden it's okay that that there's going to be someone who's willing to go with you when you have another book and another idea, because you're a proven entity now, and it's worth investing in your work. So it suddenly is a bit of a weight lifted off you. It's not about the fame or any of the other things. Writers just want to keep writing, and we want the indulgence of readers and publishers and booksellers to keep writing.
Well, you've certainly proven you can do that. And I think you and Source getting together was wonderful, because they are more open to all of these things. They're kind of a breath of fresh air right now among publishers.
They are, and they're willing to take on a book that's a bit weird. So I mean, when you send out a synopsis and you send out these ideas of this is what the book's about, quite often if it doesn't fall into the middle of the genre, publishers can be a bit skittish, but Source Books just embrace that.
Yes.
And I love writing Roland, which is a traditional crime fiction, but I also love writing things that push the edges of the envelope. I like novelty in a novel. I love the idea of writing something in a way that nobody else ever tried before, or playing with an idea that no one's ever had before. But those sort of books are hard to get support for, because they're unproven entities. So Source Books was wonderful with that. They were willing just to take it and embrace it for what it was, not to try and hide it or dress it up as something else, and to go that way. Even in Australia, metafiction is a terrifying term for publishers. They actually say to you, just don't say that word. Say a book within a book, don't say metafiction. It'll scare people. So it's been a really lovely partnership, and I've loved working with them.
Well, it was highly successful. And is the little noises we hear, did Pig wake up?
Pig woke up and I think she went back to sleep.
Ah, we missed getting to see her.
I have. Oh, I can show you. But once she's awake, she's awake.
Tell them what
wait till the very last moment.
Tell them what you're training her to do.
Well, she's going to be my truffle hunter. So I live on a truffery. So we have truffles. And last winter, I used to have the most beautiful dog, Badger. And he was so clever and such a good truffle hunter. But he was very old and he passed away last spring. And it took us a long time to get a new dog because we're kind of heartbroken, to be honest.
Mm-hmm.
But in the end, I thought, well, we need a dog. We can't find the truffles ourselves. It's not like I can go sniffing under the trees. And so we got an English Springer Spaniel who's naturally a nose dog. And I'm going to be scent training her to find the truffles because the truffles grow under the ground. So you have no idea where they are unless the dog tells you where they are. So she's just a puppy. She's only 3.5 months old. And she's just lovely. She's very active, and she's learning to sit now, and she's always very nose down. So I don't think it'll be too much of a problem. And this winter we're not harvesting very much. We're just taking her out to the truffery to train her, and then next winter we'll think about harvesting truffles again once we have a dog that knows where to find them or how to find them.
Well, and that's not their only dog, of course.
No, I have 4. I'm a dog person. I'm completely and utterly a dog person. I know writers are supposed to be cat people, but I've been a dog person from the very beginning. So on the couch behind me, I don't know if you can see them asleep.
Yes.
So that's my Labradoodle and my Cavoodle. That's Rolly and Miss Higgins. And then in my son's bedroom is a big Hunterway who he brought home as a stray, called Alfie. And Alfie sleeps in the other room because when the puppy's awake, he's too old to be bothered with puppies. And she is obsessed with him and pulls his ears and climbs all over him, and he just gets fed up. And so he goes and hides in the other room. So they're my writing companions, because my sons are at school or at work and my husband's at work, so mostly during the day I'm sitting here with dogs on my feet, tapping away on the computer. So they've been with me for several novels now.
It's wonderful. This has been a wonderful interview tonight. It's just more like visiting friends, sitting in a living room and visiting. Catherine, please.
I just wanted to say that when you 4 Australian writers came through, it was one of the most delightful memories of that type of event that I have. And I learned Australian literature, or the bits of it that the 4 of you represented. And I must say that it was just a wonderful experience. So when Anne mentioned that you had a book coming out and that you would be joining us via Zoom, I was very excited. So thank you so much for remembering us.
Oh, no, couldn't possibly forget you. We just, Book Carnival was, I mean, there was so much warmth in that room. It was just so comfortable. It was just lovely. Occasionally, we'd go to a big bookshop and it'd be a little bit formal, a little bit, but Book Carnival, we knew we were among friends when we were there. And look, that tour was just so much fun. The 4 of us traveling together. It was crazy. We were sharing rooms sometimes. I slept on the couch most of the time because we'd get these Airbnbs that would say sleeps 4, but what they'd mean is 2 double beds. And Emma, who was traveling with me, so the guys seemed to be able to cope, but Emma's an insomniac. She really has a hard time sleeping, and so she can't share a bed with me. And so for most of the tour I slept on the couch, so that Emma could have the bed and maybe get 3 or 4 hours sleep a night, because I'm the other extreme. I can just decide to go to sleep and fall asleep.
Wow.
But it was mad. It was insane, but so much fun. We were going for 3 weeks, but at the end of 3 weeks, we wanted to go for another 3.
Oh,
And there
so
were so
wonderful
many.
to hear.
It was just, we just adored it. We met so many wonderful Americans. And we were meeting book people, which was so, before we went, we kind of expected to meet a few crazy Americans.
Just a few.
And we had a plan in case we were pulled up, but we were terrified of the police. We thought, if we're pulled up, what if they shoot us? And so we had this plan where I was going to hide in the back, and Robert, who was the whitest of us, would get out and talk to them. And that was the plan, but luckily we were never pulled over. And everybody we met was generous and charming and intelligent and lovely. It was absolutely what. And I wrote to Larry afterwards, because he's the one who had been telling me, be wary of crazy Americans, and I said to him, everyone I met was lovely. And he said, yeah, that's because you were meeting book people.
Yes.
People who go to bookstores are lovely. And so maybe that was the case. We were almost disappointed that we didn't meet any crazy Americans. Everybody.
That sounds like a story right there. That sounds like a story waiting to be told.
We have plenty to share with you.
Well, our big thing here is that we're quite freaked out by guns. Guns aren't part of our culture. So
Right.
we get, when we see a gun, that's all we can look at.
Yeah.
It's huge danger signal. And we thought that the place would be crawling with guns. And we, in fact, had a wager on where, the first person to spot someone with a holster and a gun would be the winner. And we didn't. Nobody took out the.
Did you go to Texas?
I was
Yeah,
just
we went
going
to
to ask
Texas, and
that.
we walked around Dallas. And
Oh,
we did see some crazy people. We went to the grassy knoll.
Yes.
Yes.
And there's a cross where JFK was shot, and we saw these crazy and it's in the middle of a highway.
Yeah.
And we saw these crazy people standing on the cross taking selfies with the traffic going whizzing past them. And we thought, oh, that's just mad. And we saw that, and we talked to all the conspiracy theorists that were hanging around there. So there's a whole group of people who just sort of sit there and they just talk to you, and they've got these crazy theories about what happened and so on.
right.
And he's still alive and all that. Yeah.
Yeah. As tourists and writers, it was really interesting to talk to them. And they were, like this at the time we were talking, the people we were talking to were harmless. They weren't the extreme thing. They were just funny. and so we found that all really entertaining. We were really interested in Dallas, because nobody walks in Dallas. Everybody goes. So we were walking the streets of Dallas, and it seemed like we were the only people in the entire city.
Mhm.
And we're told afterwards it's because everybody's in their cars.
Yeah.
Right.
And nobody
California
just
is the same way.
Wow. Well, see, that took us by surprise, because our cities, everybody's on foot, because nobody wants to drive in the city because traffic, and everybody's just wandering around. So it was all really, really interesting. We love New York. That was amazing.
We all do. Yes, my favorite city to visit.
Mm-hmm. And we came to California, and we booked a place in Hollywood Boulevard, thinking that it would be fancy, and we didn't realize it was Skid Row. It was eye-opening. That's where we were staying in a dive hotel on Skid Row.
We really needed to have helped you more.
Oh my God, Hollywood Boulevard, that sounds fancy. Wow. bragging to everyone that we were staying on Hollywood Boulevard.
Oh dear.
So that was really, it was just this wonderful introduction. And the difference between America and Australia, I think, is that all your states are so different.
Yes.
So you have so many more than we do. So we have a country around about the same size, but we only really have 7 states in that same area.
Wow.
And there's not really that much difference between one state and another. There's not a lot of cultural difference, whilst the American states are so different as you go through, and so culturally different as opposed to just landscape and so on. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it's definitely different, and we enjoy every bit of it.
Yeah, I need 3 years to travel through the states and
There you go.
and stop and linger and get to know people. It's just, I've been buzzing about it since I came home and saying to my boys, I need to take you back. For one thing, I need to show you the Grand Canyon.
Yes.
Because I think that just changed my life.
It's very dramatic, and we get blasé about it because we live here and we know it so well and know where it's at. We take these things for granted, and it's very interesting to hear someone else talk about it.
Oh yeah, it was just mind-blowing. And you know, the funny thing was that, again, it was the whole American culture that's coming in through television. All I could think of on the way to the Grand Canyon was when the Brady Bunch went to the Grand Canyon and rode down on donkeys. And so when I saw it, it just absolutely blew me away. The Brady Bunch just did not do justice.
Well, you know, this has been wonderful. We can't wait to see you in October. Really look forward to that.
Can't wait to see you either. I'm really looking forward to coming back to Book Carnival.
Yes, it'll be just for you. And we want to thank you so much. You've been so generous of your time, because I know it's late. Oh, tell them it's tomorrow. Where are you
It's
at?
tomorrow.
Right.
It's
Yes.
tomorrow. It's not late. I've been doing night shifts for a lot of American Zooms, but this is midday.
So it's midday tomorrow.
Yeah, it's midday tomorrow. which is very, very civilized. I was doing a couple of Zooms at 4 a.m, and 3 a.m, and 2 a.m.
Oh no.
And so I became very accustomed to just getting dressed on top. With my pajamas and my slippers underneath. I'm thinking, I hope I don't have to stand up at any time during this Zoom, because then they'll know.
Well, we can't top that with anything. So we'll leave us with that image.
Yeah.
Thank you again, Sulari.
Thank
It's
you
just
all
been
for
wonderful. Can't wait for you to visit, and we'll just have more fun. Bye now.
Bye.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Anne.
This has been one of the best.